of Vic Goli from Kasiti Sabah. I'd like to say good evening to you and welcome to the General Public Affair. Good evening to you, Johannesburg. You are tuned into the General Public Affair on UJFM 95.4 Beats of Intellectual Swag. My name is Linda Khumalo and welcome to it. And I hope, as you know, as per tradition on the General Public Affair, you have to assassinate your Monday. So I hope you did assassinate your Monday, because if you assassinate your Monday, you've got the rest of the week host stage. So without further ado, we are about to get into a brand new feature on the General Public Affair, which is called African Insight. So the burning question this evening is, what does it mean to you being an African? Or what does Africa mean to you? And I'm not alone in studio. I am joined by Tony Shabangu, who is going to be telling us more about Africa and African insights. Good evening. How are you, Tony?
I'm well, thank you. So how are you doing today?
I'm very well, man.
Yeah. So you asked a very, very burning hot question there. Please repeat it for me and the others listening.
What is Africa or African to you?
Whoa, so I'll tell you this. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer about this. So I'm going to give you my answer, what I think. I think Africa as a whole is something which, well, rather Africa, there's a place called Africa, but I think there's also something else which we embody, which is Africa, which is within each of us, which makes us African. And that thing is something I can't put a finger on, but I think it's an experience. It's a way of life, a way of viewing the world, which is unique to where we come from, who we are, and even unique to how we relate to the world. So being African, for me, is an experience. It's rather not an origin or I was born in a certain location, but rather an experience and a way of looking at the world, which is very unique to me and you and everyone else born in this continent called Africa.
Called Africa. So my question is, we've been seeing a lot happening in 2015 and 2016, and currently now when it comes to South African universities, where students are decolonizing South African universities. So I'd like to know, what is Africa when it comes to decolonizing our universities? Because in VET, they were decolonizing the names of certain buildings to giving it like your African or your prehistoric leaders that fought for freedom in South Africa.
Yeah. So I think in light of the transformation and decolonization happening in university and universities as a whole in South Africa, the project of Africa is to remind us of certain values that are unique to this continent, unique to our spaces as South Africans, as Southern Africans, and as the rest of the continent. And these values should inform a way of life. As I said, it's a way of viewing the world and a way of relating to the world. So what we need to do as people who are Africans and in university right now is to look at how we've come to know things, how we've learned things, and see whether there's a deep colonial influence in how we've known things, and then look further back to see if there's anything we can learn from indigenous African values that can inform society of how we should restructure education, restructure society, and restructure the way we see each other.
So my question is, you from different content from the internet, there's a debate on Africa was named after a Roman general called Leo Africanus. So, and then other people say, no, the general was named after Africa, because when you look at the word Africa, it originates from an Egyptian word called Africa, with Afri, but with the U, Ika, which means motherland. So I'd like to know, what's your perception or what's your view on that?
So there's actually quite a lot of material based on how Africa got its name and how it was viewed by the world. So in African Insights this week, we were dealing with a certain reading from Yves Mudimbe, who says that Africa was seen as a smaller Europe, as another, and was given a name only on the basis of their Africa as the other. So imagine that Europeans were the real, and Africa was what is called, what Sarah Kweban calls the ephemeral, the almost the other, which they create to expand their colony. So there's a lot of contents surrounding how the word Africa came about. I just feel like at the very base of it, there's a fundamental view of another, of a smaller version of an empire that came with naming our continent Africa.
But according to you, how do you think the word Africa came about? Do you believe that Africa has been Africa since prehistoric times? Because when you look at certain history content, it will tell you that Africa was called Ethiopia, the entire continent, before it was called Africa. And when you look at back also in history, you'd find that it was also called Kush. So I'd like to know from you, are these facts or are these debatable?
I think at the very base of it, we can find some truth in all of these. There's a few names for Africa, which are indigenously African names for this continent that we found ourselves on. So also, we have to understand that Africa is not one place. I don't just visit one place when I go to Africa. Africa is a variety of different countries with various languages. So like me and you, we may interpret the same thing in various ways. And therefore, I don't think there's one right word for what Africa is. But if we look at our African cultures before colonialism, we can find a bunch of names which talk about this continent in a very colonized, in a way which is clear and is very honest. So the word Africa itself, it did come with colonization, and there were quite a few other names for Africa. And if you do look in our history, you can find that certain parts of Africa had different names for the continents. So this name Africa is not something which I think encompasses everyone on the continent and everything. It's something which came about with colonialism and erased the identity of the African before that.
So, well, I like the fact that you say it came about with colonialism, rather. So, don't you think when we talk of decolonizing, we should start with the continent first, the source? Because even our African borders, these are colonial borders.
Yes.
Because these borders were not created by us, if I may say in brackets, Africans.
Yes, that's absolutely true. And even the languages we speak are different and separated from one another, whereas and that came with colonialism. Whereas in Africa before, I feel like there was much more of a neighborly feel with me and all the other Africans that were my neighbors. And then colonialism came and drew boundaries between me and my brothers, me and my sisters. And not only did they draw boundaries, but languages came with this, which separated us even further and took away the identity that we shared as Africans, which is why we have a big project of re-establishing what is African. Who is African? Are you African? What makes you African?
Yes, please do join in the conversation. You can hit me up on Twitter at UJFM, at Smurfzine, or hashtag The General Public Affair, hashtag African Insights. We are talking, what does it mean to you being African, or what does Africa mean to you, considering the fact of decolonization in African institutions? But for now, let's take a short music break. We will be back in a few minutes.